Okay. This one we're going to have a discussion on. It's the OPD's ShotSpotter annual report. I don't know. Lou, can you take that, hand that out maybe halfway that way? You can maybe hand that out that way. So the annual report stage is where we look, obviously, at efficacy and other statistics that are reported in, but we also have a duty to make a finding that the benefits outweigh the costs, both invasiveness and or taxpayer. We need to look for use policy violations, et cetera. And so that's what our job is going to be tonight. This motion that's getting handed out, do you have, okay, sorry, that's all I got. There's been an awful lot of research that's come out in the last few months, if not to a year. It's kind of made me question some original of my own positions, but also in just the overall holistic kind of picture of Oakland is dead broke. We're not effectively solving violent crime. And so I started talking to some folks because our standard is not just benefits outweigh the costs, period. It's that no alternative with a lesser economic cost or impact on civil rights would be as effective. And on an unrelated project, I've been talking to a lot of folks about where our actual bottlenecks are. What is working, what isn't working. I don't know if you saw that report that came out a little bit ago. I had it, it's footnoted in here, but of the 7 major categories of crime, we had an overall blended 1.5% clearance rate. And if you hear that, it sounds like our police are horrible. They can't solve that. But if you actually go below the headline and start going, okay, what's going on? Anyway, that was an unrelated research project that I've been doing. And the number one thing I've heard is that our crime lab is chronically understaffed, underfunded, lacks equipment, space, capacity, you name it. Our backlog is years long in processing evidence. And so for the public, we'll get more into this and I'll read it, but basically the gist of the motion I'm going to make is to reallocate funds towards the crime lab. I believe that's a more effective alternative. And when I showed up in 2014, we were talking about this 2012 grand jury report that we list in here. And I think at the time there was something like 3,500 different rape kits that we hadn't processed. We had a 9-year backlog on homicide evidence. And it hasn't greatly improved since then. I mean, that was 12 years ago. And so just not only as an Oaklander, but as somebody that has to vet this through a cost-benefit lens, we'll get into these findings and research in our discussion part, but I think a more effective route is to, at least in this near future, I think our projected budget right now is $177 million. We don't have any money. We have to reallocate it because there's nothing coming from anywhere else. There's no federal bailout coming. So we need to figure out what works right now, and the community is rightfully concerned about the lack of violent crime solving. Victims are not getting justice when you're waiting for 9 years just to even get a decision on your case. So I don't know, sir, if you're presenting the ShotSpotter report, if you want to come in. I just wanted to get that out there right now. You could, respond to any part of it, but I do have specific questions on the annual report itself, areas that are not compliant, but I can reserve those for a little bit later. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and introduce the report.
Good morning, Chair. My name is Frederick Chavis. I'm the acting captain of police for the Ceasefire Division, and I'm here to present on the annual report. My apologies for being late to the podium. I was reading through your recommendation. If I may, the annual report details the number of incidents, gunshot location, gunshot location activations that the Oakland Police Department were alerted to by Sound Thinking or ShotSpotter over the course of 2023. There were 8,300, over 8,300, 8,318 incidents that were not called by the community as 415 gunshots, which is what they're normally either called in by community members or reported on by an officer on duty who may hear gunshots. ShotSpotter led to 199 shooting cases, 29 of which were homicides, or 170 assault with firearms. I can get through the data, but I also think that, to your point, Chair Hofer, that you'd like some robust discussion around efficacy.
And I'm going to assume my colleagues have read the report. We can. It speaks
Yes,
for
sir.
itself. So first, let me just say: is any member of the public want to comment on this? Can do so now. Okay. And I first want to preface: of all the technologies we have, a gunshot detecting one is probably the easiest to root for. I've lived here most of my life, not born and raised, but I've lived here most of my life. We've always had a gun problem, always. And so this is a technology you absolutely would want to work. And probably if this was a $20,000 subscription, model, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But we spend millions of dollars on this technology, and I don't think we're getting the return that we need in this moment. This is not necessarily a forever decision, but when you're in a budget crisis and cuts are getting made, and I think separately, I always argue our budget reflects our priorities. We underfund things that really matter in the city of Oakland. One of those is the crime lab. And I'm sorry, why can't I scroll to this page? I do want to ask, just on the municipal code. There's okay, so you're supposed to. So let me pick up the exact code. You guys kind of have it. Felicia, are we ever able to get to where we can project onto big? At least it wasn't Jen. Actually, I don't know that for truth, is it? I hope we're not going the way of the Antioch, whatever. I better be quiet before Antioch gets mad at me. All right. Okay. OMC 9.64 in the annual report requires a summary of community complaints or concerns. Maybe community complaint to you doesn't mean lawsuit, but I kind of think it would be one. But more importantly, under F and G, the results of any audits, any information about violations or potential violations of the use policy, any actions taken in response. So you guys were sued for violating the approved use policy because you allowed third parties access. So that would fit under here, but you don't have that part in the annual report. Under G, information about any data breaches or other unauthorized access to the data. That would also qualify, and it's silent on there.
The data breach as it relates to the city of Oakland's data breach?
Well, no, see where the language says or other unauthorized access to the data. So the ransomware attack, you guys are saying there was no breach on that. That's okay. I don't have any evidence to the contrary. What we do know is that you guys allowed unauthorized access. And
Correct.
you were not here last year when the annual report was presented, and so I'm thinking something is getting lost at OPD between the left hand and the right hand, because in this year's annual report again, you guys again frame Oakland Housing Authority, and you again bring that 2012 MOU.
Correct.
But all of that was mooted.
So I apologize. I was not here. However,
Yeah.
I have been on the team to put forth the new use policy, which has been completed for some time, presented to the city attorney, and should be, we were hoping to present to you this evening, but it hasn't been approved through the agency, through the chain of command. And so you are correct, sir. I was not here, but I am a part of the team to correct it, or have,
Okay,
not
so,
necessarily to correct it, to present new language for.
so you're going to be asking for additional permissions you don't presently have. I understand that. But there is an existing law and settlement agreement where OPD promised to follow the existing policy, and here it says you're still providing access to an unauthorized third party. So you see that as the issue.
I do see that as the issue, and I know that we're not providing, so it's an inaccuracy, and I apologize, but
So the
we're
annual
not,
report is wrong.
we're not providing, to my knowledge, any access to OHA or any other. I know that there are some information that we provide to the district attorney's office, which is also being added to the proposed use policy.
Okay, so when the annual report says these, I mean, it says has, it's not in the past on page
Correct.
3. So when it says the Oakland Housing Authority has ongoing login access, you're just saying that's wrong.
I can report back, but again, on the project that I'm working on, is under the impression that they do not, and that we are going to request from your body, sir, that they be granted access.
Okay, but you don't know technically whether this is actually occurring or not?
Right this second, as I stand before you, sir.
Okay.
I don't, and I don't want to speak.
Okay.
I don't want to tell
Okay.
the story.
Okay. And I think the other confusion was just common understanding language of third-party district attorney is not the city of Oakland, so we all treat that as a third
absolutely.
party. You
I
guys
agree.
are like, hey, they're sitting at the desk with us,
I agree with
and
you.
we have to.
Which is why we're adding
so
that
let's-
to the
So you
use
want to
policy.
change that language?
Yes.
Okay. So, I don't know if you want to keep standing there. Some of these findings aren't, well, some of them are specific to, but I'm going to, for the public that can't see this, I'm going to just talk about these findings. The foundation of this ordinance is, among the many concepts are purpose specification. What is the purpose for using this particular tool? And in the old days, it was kind of ShotSpotter is going to reduce gun violence, and it's just not happening anywhere. And in America, when the electeds are unwilling to do anything reasonable about gun control, I don't even know if any technology can, but this one is not reducing gun violence. And then it's kind of pivoted, in no small part because of Oakland, to like, well, we're getting folks faster to the scene to respond and provide first aid. Okay, a little bit. Is it worth $2 million? That's maybe what we're going to kind of decide tonight. But there's a lot of other things that haven't been studied before that have, all within the last year, true statistical analysis. And that's what you can see in these findings, that, OPD's own last 4 annual reports, the number of alerts where nothing actionable happens, so we're calling these wild goose chases, has been 74%, 83, 76, and 78. And analysis has shown in other jurisdictions where they've just had more access to information that response times are actually increasing. We already have a horrible problem with that in Oakland because we apparently didn't hire any 911 operators for a couple of years. I know personally I was calling in, there was like 3 months in a row I was calling in where I saw people bipping. I was on hold for like 6-7 minutes. So we have one, problem in the chain. The second problem in the chain is that OPD is getting misdirected up to 83% of the time towards something and taking them away from, other legitimate police work. So the argument is, it's actually harming us by increasing response times and increasing our workload, chasing, phantoms essentially. The other big problem that, and I've raised this from the very beginning, there is no deterrent effect. I have never seen in any jurisdiction I've studied, with a similar population, double-digit arrests. And if you look at the large, like Chicago, New York, okay, they're hitting double digits, but at their populations, that's just not enough. So OPD's last 4 annual reports say 8, 8, 7, and 4. That's just not deterring people, and I think our gun statistics show that. Gun violence is not decreasing. The kind of big one, and I had to dig into this, and all these things, all these reports are free. None of these are paywalled. You've probably seen a lot of them in your Twitter feed because some of them got some pretty big traffic, but there's no, in these reports it says we capture a lot of guns and casings, but there's no proven correlation into a positive impact on the rate of gun violence, and it doesn't lead to increased arrests or convictions. Now, one reason might be because our crime lab is so backed up with ballistics that it can't even process what it already has. The other problem is we can't find these guns in the database. We don't have witnesses. There's just not enough evidence. It doesn't go anywhere. That's, the biggest problem.
And sir, if I may.
Yep.
Not to speak anecdotally, but just last night, I'm in charge of the ceasefire division. We were working an operation in which there were ShotSpotter activations on Ocean in the 1900 block. Patrol units responded there. My team was in the Fruitvale or along 30th in the 30s or in the 40s. 6 minutes later, there were 4 activations of ShotSpotter on Cortland and on 45th Avenue. Because our units were there, they were able to respond. They were listening to the call of the previous incident being a black SUV as being the suspect vehicle. They responded to Cortland immediately, were able to observe a black SUV fleeing the scene with strike marks to the driver's side window. This is last night. This is less than 24 hours ago. We're able to follow that car. There were 2 individuals that were in that car that were struck by gunfire. We were able to stop the car. We were able to transport 2 of the individuals that were in the car to the hospital ourselves instead of waiting on an ambulance center. So not that occurs every day. And if it was my hope, we wouldn't have shootings every day. But I also understand that without having technology that pinpoints where people that are harmed in our community are, and I know that it would be nice to have more officers that can respond to bipping and other calls for service. I wish that we had more. I wish that we could do more. But having been the commander of the homicide section for 2.5 years, a few years ago, I also know how families are impacted by gun violence when they lose someone or they're maimed by gunfire. So I think, I don't know that you can, and again, I don't work for ShotSpotter, and you are, I also understand the fact that we're in a budgetary crisis, but I also could never put like a dollar amount on a human life. And so, and I said that to say, but I had another point with regard to the crime lab. I do think that it's under-resourced, but I also understand that we have implemented, and they've gotten some grants that have helped them to turn around ballistics. Well, I would love to have it in 24 hours, but we have seen like a 48 to 72-hour turnaround to the point where I'm sure someone has reported on this, but we have our shooting reviews that we hold every Thursday. We had one this morning. We're able to put ballistics on a priority list and have a turnaround within 72 hours. And every Wednesday, prior to our shooting review, we have IBIS and IBIN meetings where we are able to connect ballistically some of the weapons. And there's a backlog that we're working through, but also some of the newer cases that are coming in, and we're like getting up to speed. We're able to get those turned around within 72 hours. But I'm also not here to poo-poo on the crime lab, because if you want to offer them more money, I'm sure that they would take it, and it also will help towards clearance rates and even connectivity as it relates to which guns are used at which scenes, and if, all of it matters.
Agreed. And I think we're probably even maybe going to say very similar things and just come to different conclusions. And not to be disrespectful, but like, we actually do put a value on human lives. that's what actuaries do, people that issue life insurance policies, wrongful death lawsuits. And I'm not saying that to be cold. I'm saying if this was a $20,000 subscription, we wouldn't have this conversation. But at this price, we do need to have this conversation because, and I am not disputing their anecdotal successes. I mean, if I'm OPD, I'd bring out Captain Joyner. He's alive, likely because of a ShotSpotter alert and officers taking him directly to the hospital. I don't discount that. But to make broad policy on a, extreme edge case, an outlier, isn't good policy. And there's no positive correlation from just showing up to an alert site that leads nowhere. That's the bigger issue. If capturing, spent casings is not leading to arrests, if we're only taking 4 people to court, we have to start asking, is this the right tool? Is this the right tool is the question. And so let me just you'll certainly have all the time to respond. I just want to get these findings out because the public can't see this paper. And so based on the DOJ data that we're citing to, for all the top Part 1 categories, we've had a 1.5% clearance rate, 6.5% clearance rate for violent crimes. And there's a number of variables within that, but one that seems apparent after this many years as a ShotSpotter customer is that this particular technology isn't putting a dent in these problems. The officer workload, I think, is a really huge problem right now when we don't have a real significant number of officers out on the street at any one time. I remember, sort of came up during the ALPR thing a little bit when OPD briefly tried to still go with mobile readers and all this. Like, who's going to drive them? We don't have any staffers, to drive them if you go with mobile. So, you've got to pivot to fixed. These are the wrinkles that I'm looking at. I wish this technology reduced gun violence. I wish it, put the shooters in jail. I wish it, helped us render first aid to people more effectively. But after, I think we've been in contract since '08, maybe 2010. But that's a long time to not see, a statistically significant increase. The other big piece, and this is consistent across all jurisdictions, the overwhelming amount of arrests and police reports are not due to gun violence. So, I'm not the privacy activist that thinks ShotSpotter is a privacy nightmare. It's not. I thoroughly disagree with that. There's 5 known recordings of a human voice out of 1 billion. That's a nothing burger. But there is a growing body of research that is suggesting that we're bringing officers in a heightened state of anxiety more often into certain communities. That increases the risk of a violent incident occurring. And what it appears to be doing most certainly is increasing the disparate impact of over-policing certain neighborhoods. You're not actually going in and solving gun violence. What you're doing is you're finding people with, these ticky-tack probation violations or, drunk in public, whatever. It's, okay, these things are annoying or whatever. They harm our quality of life, but they're not gun violence. It's not the big stuff that we need to really focus on as a community right now. It's been interesting in Oakland. I put this part in about Chief Went. He didn't want to renew the ShotSpotter contract. He didn't have confidence. And it was the city council that made him took it back because there's this public pressure of we got to do something about public safety. And I thoroughly agree. What I am frustrated with as a longtime Oaklander is that we throw money at things that don't work and we underfund the things that could work or we know that work and we just don't fund them well. ShotSpotter, Durham, Chicago finally is where, the data started creeping out because their OIG got involved and then a bunch of third-party researchers. And a number of these reports that are cited are coming out of there. Just the response times and the lack of effectiveness, it's just not in the numbers. And just, again, during the annual reports, like, we have to make sure that our use policies are being adhered to. And, yes, okay, OPD intends to ask for additional authority in the future to do X, Y, and Z, but they don't have authority. And they already got sued on it and had to settle and pay me attorney's fees. And so, the message isn't getting through, or maybe it is, and just the annual reports are not well, I guess. But so I'm just going to put this motion on the floor so we can discuss it. The PAC recommends that the City Council not renew or extend the contract with ShotSpotter, which expires at the end of June, and that the approximately $1.8 million in future savings be directed towards the crime lab, which is greatly understaffed and lacking in capacity to process our multi-year backlog of evidence. Improved processing of evidence will increase our low clearance rates and is a more effective and proven alternative with less impact to civil liberties from over-policing compared to ShotSpotter that will actually improve public safety as we solve violent crimes. So that's a motion. Go ahead. Okay, seconded by Commissioner Katz, but I imagine we have more to talk about. And certainly, if you want to respond.
Just if I may,
Yeah.
again, not being in charge of the OPD budget, but understanding that community calls are inherently inaccurate. You talked about staffing the crime lab, which matters in certain instances where an individual is actually struck. But what we found in our IBIS and IBIN meetings is that there are a number of shots, I live in Oakland as well, where we hear gunshots, where what you call a wild goose chase, those guns come back connected to other shootings, other feuds within the city. It leads to a better understanding of the crime that's actually driving, what's actually driving violent crime, at least in our city. It's come back to robbers or things that we just think about, oh, maybe this was some sort of road rage, but it actually was a gang member engaged in some sort of violence against another party, right? And so we're able to, I say all of that to say the notion that we get rid of one to fund the other, I don't necessarily agree. I think it should be both and not an either or. But I do understand, Chair, the budget constraints. But I think the notion that you just wipe one out, you talk about trying to increase solve rates, you lose the ability to understand when these guns were used, because you more than likely don't even recover those casings. Because
And how does that help you when your data says 4 people were arrested?
4 people were arrested when officers responded immediately and arrested somebody off of an alert. A number of individuals were arrested throughout the city for shooting incidents that were assisted by ShotSpotter. Individuals were able to, again, we meet every Wednesday.
You said
Yes,
4. And so, and maybe if you were saying, some investigations take time to.
Investigations do take time.
So last year was 7.
What I'm saying is when gunfire goes off, officers respond. 4 people being arrested with guns, I can see how you see that as a low thing, but that's not. Very few people fire their guns and stand there. And sometimes we get ShotSpotter, we can respond within 30 seconds. But in those 30 seconds, I just watched the video this morning where an individual was still on scene even by the time fire arrived because they were in the area. But as he's walking away, folks don't normally just stand there with their guns, but there have been some. And there have been some celebratory, some other reasons why that 4 even exists. I would think they would be 0 because I would run. But
and that is the inherent problem in this technology, is that with rare exceptions, I guess the knucklehead that wanted to pose for the photo op with you, they're not going to be there.
But it's not
they're
about
not
recovering the firearm
right, but recovering the firearms hasn't led to anything. It hasn't.
All right, I disagree, but I will.
I'm relying on
reasonable
your
people
data, though.
You're,
If
yeah, but I
if
think
if
that
you
your
only
interpretation of the data is. I understand. You. I
yeah
understand.
no I if I why in order to prosecute do we have to arrest? And if we don't
We've
arrest
made more than four.
anybody,
We've made more than four arrests. I think looking at it in totality of ShotSpotter being a tool or a portion of the investigation versus the main cause of the arrest, I think is where we differ. Or if we, maybe I'm not.
I'm going with OPD's annual report, which
And I'm
says
telling you that
for,
ShotSpotter was responsible for a direct response and arrest of four people. Yes, but it also you have to look at it in a broader scope as it's just one of the tools that we use in our investigations to include the crime lab, to include human
right,
investigations.
but our ordinance requires we evaluate these technologies on their own, and I can't quite tell if you're telling me, oh, we have a whole lot more data, we just didn't put it in the annual report, or you're saying don't believe what's in the annual report.
What I'm saying is that the question that was asked in the annual report and the way that we interpret it, a response to a ShotSpotter activation and a firearm recovered and an individual arrested on a direct response versus an individual being harmed, us recovering casings, us understanding, giving us an idea of where to canvas for video and all. Like it's investigations aren't singular; they're broad. They take on law enforcement officers, members of the community, technology. It's not one thing.
Okay. Commissioner Brown?
I just wanted to clarify what's being said. I think your point about leading to a direct arrest is an interesting one. I guess in my mind, I think of it kind of like a funnel. Like at the top of the funnel, you have a whole lot of alerts, of which at a smaller number, maybe you find evidence, of which at a really small number, you're able to make a direct arrest. But maybe somewhere in between, you collect the evidence and it later leads to an arrest in a different, maybe it's related to a different case. But
No,
is
that is true, but also it leads to finding individuals that have been harmed, that folks in the community may either have been desensitized to gun violence or to gunshots, or may be afraid to call the police. Last night, the case that I talked to you about last night, an individual called me and said, the car is parked in front of my house on Ellen. I'm not going to call the police because I don't even want you to knock on my door. But you can go in my neighborhood and maybe someone else has a camera and they can talk to you. Individuals are oftentimes in fear. And so it's a piece of technology that allows us to find individuals, to give us a pinpoint accuracy to a degree, right? 86 or so % of where it actually occurred. And then you conduct an investigation. You can, because I agree that I would like our solve rates to be higher. And that's something that we need to work on.
Well, and I think just to clarify as well, what I'd like to understand is, I think we've narrowed in on the fact that it's maybe resulted in 4 arrests, but I'm wondering if we aren't. Is there something that we're missing, like where you do pick up a casing or a firearm and it is later connected to a different crime and
Absolutely.
it leads to an arrest there? Because that data would not be reflected in this
It's not
report, right?
So again, my apologies. The interpretation of the question, we believed, was that it was the direct response,
And just, if you can clarify, what question are you?
or the way that it was written. We were analyzing
The annual report ordinance?
correct.
All right.
We
So
were
I'll just
analyzing
read it out. It says information including crime statistics that helps the community assess whether the technology has been effective at achieving its identified purpose. So there's nothing about response or alert or.
I know, but so if I may, what we were trying to draw out is when an individual responds directly to a ShotSpotter activation and recover a gun. If I may, to give an analogy, if I fire off a weapon, ShotSpotter is activated. You respond, and I am the person arrested. And I think to your point, Chair, about it deterring gun violence. Again, I think that needs to be looked at holistically, because having gunshot detection doesn't in itself zap guns out of people's hands or out of their pockets. But I think that if you look at it in a broader scheme, responding to when an individual is harmed, recovering casings, conducting an investigation, and leading, to your point, sir, to higher solve rates does deter violence. And I think that it's, like I said, I've said it and I'll say it again, it's a part of a broader investigative package.
Any questions? I hope Lou's okay.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you,
Yeah.
Commissioner.
Yeah, if you want to sit down. I mean, I don't know if there's additional questions for you. Just hang tight. We might just be talking amongst ourselves. Go ahead.
Thank you. So, a couple thoughts. First is what I'll describe as a potential jurisdictional issue here. I say that because I think we're well within our area of expertise when we're comparing something like a gunshot location detection system to an alternate situational awareness tool and trying to determine whether or not one tool is better than another. I think we find ourselves in a, frankly, disadvantageous position if we're trying to say that we should defund something like a GLD tool in favor of something like a crime lab analytics. I think as a commission, we lack some sort of scope to make that decision. That should rightly go to council. But if the facts are showing that this particular tool isn't effective, that's something we should raise to council's attention. The problem I'm seeing is that looking at the report, it talks about the proposed purpose. So we've talked about the privacy effects of ShotSpotter. I think we can all come to the conclusion and have agreed in the past that we're not particularly concerned about the microphones in this case. We haven't seen the data to back up the problem of the microphones picking up things they shouldn't. So that moves us then to efficacy being the next question. But if we look at the proposed purpose of this particular technology, it was, as written, situational awareness, medical response, and evidence collection. Like, that's what's in the proposed purpose, and it seems to be doing that. So it's difficult to say that it's not being effective when it's meeting its stated purpose, which is a bit different than saying we want to spend money doing something different.
So if it meets its stated purpose, but isn't improving public safety, and the cost is 1.8 million.
So that's the thing. I don't think we have a scope to say that it's not improving public safety if we just look at this one particular technology. Because I don't think you can look at any particular technology and say that implementation is ipso facto going to improve public safety. I mean, take a drone, for example. There's some real big positives to deploying a UAV system over an active scene, but deploying that drone isn't necessarily going to improve public safety, but it can provide fantastic situational awareness and prohibit, a canine from going into a building or an officer from having to get on a rooftop. I would like to think that all these tools together, if looked at as a package, probably do have a measurable effect on public safety, but I don't know that we have the scope to make that analysis by looking at each of them individually. We can look at some of the it's hard. I think it's hard to get to that point of saying, what does this do for greater public safety when we're looking at kind of one tool at a time? And that's where I think we run into our jurisdictional issue, is because our focus is somewhat narrow in terms of privacy effects and the efficacy of the selected tool, we don't necessarily have the same scope as, say, Council Public Safety, whose job is to look at all the tools that have been authorized or considered and decide which of them to fund and which not to. I think our recommendation saying that this one we have questions about should certainly be considered, but I'm not sure if we're the right body to say, point the finger at one program over another. And I think that's a bit concerning to hear. Quite frankly, I'd like to think that given some of the real challenges of managing and deploying human resources for every single police department in the greater Bay Area, any tool we can give officers for situational awareness or to see what's going on in the city is probably a good idea. Well, I mean, speaking for myself, I had a running gun battle down my street a week or so ago. I actually didn't call the police, but I got woken up by OPD because they were canvassing because they got the ShotSpotter alert. And that's frankly what I want OPD to be doing. I think it's worth it. Perhaps that's anecdotal, but I do think there's some real value in having that sort of awareness tool out there, given that there's minimal privacy impact, at least that I can see. And if council disagrees, that's their prerogative. But we're going to have to figure out whether we want to say that, as a commissioner, whether we want to make the, I'll say precedent for lack of a better word, in pointing the finger at a different program as opposed to saying that this particular program has issues we want to raise. I'll leave it there.
Okay, and before I call North, let me just respond on the jurisdictional issue, because that did come up during our ad hoc. I agree. Well, first off, we're advisory only, so we can't do anything. But we do make recommendations, and within the cost-benefit analysis in the annual report itself, let me find the language up here. We are supposed to determine that the benefits outweigh the costs, which is to both the invasiveness level, the civil liberties harm, potential civil liberties harm, and taxpayer cost. So efficacy is certainly within our jurisdiction. Now, where to redirect it? We're suggesting where we think it would be more helpful. Is that an express mandate in here? Maybe, because it actually does say we have to consider alternatives with a lesser cost or impact to civil liberties. So we might be stretching it a smidge. And again, saying line item, whatever, yeah, I mean, that's pushing it a bit. But if we're supposed to consider alternatives, I would think it's implied that you have to identify what that alternative would be, in your recommendation to the council. And just on your second point of, the police showed up and you found that comforting. I don't discount that, but if it doesn't go anywhere, if that's the end of the trail, did we make Oakland safer? And that's the data that isn't showing up that we made Oakland safer. Like, I guess there's an emotional component. Until 2018, responding to a gunshot was not priority one in Oakland, even with ShotSpotter. It was not a priority. I think that's where a lot of the disenfranchisement, people just stopped calling because nobody's showing up. And then even when we had ShotSpotter, they didn't show up for a number of reasons, including just, not enough humans to respond. And so if we are looking holistically, I think we have to look at all those issues. If we don't have the manpower, ShotSpotter's not going to be effective. If we don't arrest people, ShotSpotter's not going to be effective. If we aren't saving enough lives, it doesn't justify the budget. And so looking at it, big picture, it's in isolation because, that's the way this ordinance is written. We evaluate each technology on its own merits. I don't disagree with what you're saying. On my activist side, on my other side, I'm trying to get people to understand these are surveillance ecosystems. And in the approval process, nobody ever talks about that. They add ShotSpotter to East Oakland, and they don't think about, we've also done this to East Oakland, and 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 this to East Oakland. We never do that in the upfront phase. So we've surrounded certain neighborhoods with an enormous amount of surveillance technology, and we're going to go, enforce laws there, but then we don't do the same in Montclair. And so if we're going to look at these things as an entire ecosystem, I hope this body, the culture of this body, does that during the upfront process too, because we keep adding on tools. And yet, if you read the newspapers, we're all dying of murder. And the public is screaming at us to do something, not us, the city council, to do something about violent crime. We've had these tools for years. Why aren't they working? So that's just kind of where I'm not, not trying to like ban this or anything. I just, at this moment, it isn't working. We don't have money to give to other things that could be working. And I think that little part, not specifically directing it towards a certain area, but, that analysis, I think, fits within our jurisdiction. But, Commissioner.
I just want to share a little bit about, the thing that really stuck out to me was the fact that, it showed slower response times, and it reminded me of something that came up. I don't remember what year and whether it was, through an annual report where, the representative from OPD had mentioned that, frankly, they turn them off during fireworks season because of all the false alarms. And so it makes me wonder whether part of the reason why the slower response times are just because of the massive overwhelm, and it makes it harder for OPD to actually do its job, even though I understand there's... Would you like to respond?
So I maybe I misunderstood that, but I thought that the slower response time was in response to non-gunshot calls. So I thought that, and maybe I misunderstood that, but I thought that the chair was saying that because officers are on a goose chase, there's a slow response time to 911 calls.
Because
other false
ShotSpotter picks up and gets triggered by things in addition to gunshots, the number of alerts is artificially increased.
See, I don't-
So your workload is artificially increased responding to things that aren't gunshots and also wild goose chases. Okay, background noise, fireworks, and I'm sure they're constantly tuning their machine and their algorithm, but
and human beings as well. So the way that the technology works, and I can have someone from ShotSpotter come up, but it's routed down to a call center essentially.
we've done it to her.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I see a question, but that was my. I understood that as a slow response time to.
No, it's because of the artificial increase in the number of alerts. So let's say on an average day we'd have 200 alerts, but because we're picking up fireworks and auto backfires and construction noise, maybe you have 350 alerts to respond to. So
we
150
don't have
of
that
them.
many.
Huh?
We don't have 3.
I'm making up numbers. So yeah, I'm glad we don't. So we're responding to things that are fictions, phantoms. That is taking you away from whatever other good police work you were doing.
Okay.
That's the issue. It's that we're getting sent to places that aren't necessarily at all connected to any gun violence.
So again, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know that the data necessarily proves that out, that the overwhelming response are to non-gunshot related calls. But
So, every time OPD likes to say that, they don't have any data of their own. These reports can be challenged. I mean, that's what experts do. They challenge each other.
I think that's the purpose of this body.
There have been a lot. There's been a lot of research by PhD levels, folks that can do a statistical analysis. And so, you're totally welcome to say we disagree, but, back it up.
I also don't own the technology, so I get it.
Yeah.
We use it as a tool. But thank you, though.
Yeah.
I have a data question, which is, you give the number of calls not called in by the community. How many calls are called in by the community? I don't see any number. And then I have an observation, which is, if you deploy a technology in an area that is harmful to bad guys, I would expect them to move, to show up somewhere else, because this is not a good locale for them. And I don't see any indication that putting ShotSpotter in any way causes the bad guys to go somewhere else.
I agree with that second statement. I don't know that we've ever argued that. I think that was stated earlier that it was a deterrence. I don't know that sensors are a deterrence. I think that, to Chair Hofer's point, making arrests and solve rates, in my opinion, would be a deterrence. Prosecution of individuals being held accountable. But the first part of your question was, how many 415 gunshot calls do we get per year? I don't have that number, but I can try to get that number and get it to the chair and vice chair.
I agree with Vice Chair Gage's comments earlier. And I think that the totality of the tools in OPD's arsenal are all inclusive in helping to reduce crime, solve crime, address crime. And we should, to ensure we have parity, we should scrutinize those other tools and their efficacies as well. If that's the bellwether for ShotSpotter. I feel strongly that there's a domino effect to what you, as you mentioned earlier, to that ShotSpotter call, to those 4 arrests, to those calls that citizens did not have to make. I just wanted to make that comment.
What is the domino effect?
The domino effect is that it grew legs. So those calls spawned other investigations. Those arrests spawned other cases that may have come up. It spawned other things. And lastly, I think, that $1.8 million, to your earlier point, we may infer that it should go toward crime lab, but OPD may opt to use it elsewhere, on another tool, or to invest in a certain tool that they already have in place today.
Thanks for coming up here. I was going to say, just make a comment. It seems like, and I've heard about ShotSpotter, and I know there's different things, and each individual technology has to be evaluated by itself, but it just, I'm still fairly new to the council. It seems like just all the technologies, because each one's at a different age, in a different life cycle within the different application, that they don't talk to each other. And because of that, you're like, Jim knows how to do this. Well, Jim's over here doing that, and Joe's doing this. And it's just a lot of discombobulation between all the different applications that OPD uses. And I think, in talking about, software contracts, there's negotiation factors that people use. And how do you take that and maybe take that budget and make them integrate better, right? Stuff like that. That's just my, 2 cents, just of what I've seen. I kind of want to put that on the record.
I don't disagree with that. Absolutely, that's not necessarily my wheelhouse, but I think overall for the city, I think it would be a huge plus. I even think, even externally to OPD, but internally within the city, having our systems talk to DOT and others. I definitely agree. That's not my wheelhouse. But I just said all that to say I agree with you, sir.
Thanks.
Joe, I think you had a comment, and we'll come back to you. Go. Go.
Thanks. Just trying to understand a little bit more about efficacy. In reading through the report, I noticed that it says that ShotSpotter resulted in the reporting of over 8,000 gunshot incidents, 99% of which weren't called in. But then I'm looking at Table 2 on the activations that resulted in incident reports. And so we went from 8,000 alerts to about 1,700 cases with incident reports. Looking a little more closely, over 1,200 of those are negligent discharge of a firearm. So that leaves us with about 500 incident reports that were opened coming
Right.
from the 8,000.
So I think you talk about 8,000. So I talked about 2 incidents yesterday on Alcyon, which it would probably, it generated 2 incident reports. However, there were over 100 activations because on one scene there were 44 rounds fired, and on another. So I think the 8,300 are not are not just activations per se, but shots detected.
Okay.
And so you could have one incident where 130 rounds are fired.
I see.
You could have one incident where
Right.
one round was fired.
Okay, that's really helpful. So maybe that ratio of 8,000 going down to like 500 incident reports and 4 arrests is maybe not quite as like disproportionately poor as it would seem.
Yeah, yes, and yes, but I would also look at. Yes, I would just say yes. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. It's helpful. I'm not trying to be difficult or belabor the point, but I
You're
think
doing your job, and I appreciate it.
yeah, and when we think about efficacy of the technology, I think understanding you make a great point about an actual arrest not being the only outcome, but trying to understand what some of those other things are is helpful to me. I think seeing the incident reports where it's like maybe it didn't result in an arrest yet, but it may in the future. It may be tied to another type of crime is helpful. You know, whether or not that's worth the dollars we're spending towards it is another question. I think secondly, just briefly, Chair, that I think I very much agree with the sentiment behind the findings regarding not flushing our limited dollars down the drain on a technology that's not getting what I think we all hoped it would get us in terms of impact. But I also do recognize some of the jurisdictional concerns, and I think I personally feel more comfortable with the concept of saying we don't necessarily see privacy concerns related to this technology. However, it's also extremely difficult to understand whether or not if it's effective. Therefore, we may not recommend pursuing the contract any further. But I think saying that, like the sentiment of saying we would support shifting funding to something else that's designed to reduce violent crimes that has a lesser impact on civil liberties or has similar to less impact, I think is something that would be easier to get behind than maybe specifically designating what we think that priority should be.
As the maker of the motion, I could support that. Let me tell you why I put in Crime Lab. As I alluded to earlier, I've been working on this other much larger project, and I've been surveying a number of folks from frontline patrol officers on up, and 100% of everyone I've spoken to has identified the Crime Lab as where they would redirect money. Not exclusively, but they've all said Crime Lab. So that's why I chose it. I think you guys have heard enough about my cynicism about electeds. What I'm terrified of if we don't make a recommendation where to send it, and we have a $177 million budget deficit, they're going to put it somewhere that doesn't solve or help improve public safety. But I understand the concerns. If that would get you to support this, and my maker of the second would agree to that, we could just end it as we don't see sufficient benefits to outweigh the costs and recommend non-renewal.
I think I could also be comfortable with something that said something more along the lines of, something more effective, such as, but not specifically limiting it to the crime lab.
Can I ask a question?
You may,
so
sir.
Thank you, Chair.
You have a question?
I stipulated to the 4 number, but can you show me where in the annual report you're referring to the 4 arrests?
Yeah, so I have to infer, because you guys, and this has been going on for 3 years now, and I don't know why you won't change that either. You guys you refuse to use the word arrest, I think because you're afraid I'm going to use it against you. But so what I'm doing, because I know you can't get to court without an arrest, so you say court preparation for 4 cases.
So
that's...
So I stipulated to that but that's not, again, a true and accurate account of my annual report. So could I, if I may, sir? So talking about...
Hold on one second. Say that last sentence you just said.
It's not...
This data is not accurate?
No, it is.
Oh, okay. The interpretation. Gotcha.
Not even the interpretation, sir. What I'm saying is that I didn't ask a clarifying question, Chair, and so my apologies. So court preparation, and again, I don't know the issues with people not wanting to say arrest in the past and things of that nature, but there is a table that I added on page 7 that relates to guns recovered in specific ShotSpotters, like, again, I talked about it. So, again, I had stipulated to the 4 number but
Right.
I didn't understand the question that you were
That's
asking.
sure,
I
and
apologize.
that's fine. The issue is we went to court only 4 times, not even necessarily got a. Actually, that's not even true.
That's not true.
You're right. Preparing for court isn't even going to court,
But it's
and that can often be up to the DA. You don't have to defend the whole life cycle. I know. Things could have pled. People could plea out. There's a whole number of reasons we don't get a conviction. I understand, but we've got now 4 annual reports. The number of DFRs are extremely low, which I know means we're not going to arrest and identify and take people
But
to
those
court.
4, sir, are for experts discussing ShotSpotter, not the technology being used. In every shooting incident, in every homicide, we use ShotSpotter to prepare for court. Those 4 are for very specific.
Not in everyone, but you can say maybe the majority.
The ones where there is an activation, I think that I can't say you're right. I can't say everyone, but I would even argue that a defense attorney would argue, well, you don't even have a record of but
You don't like a defense attorney?
I love everybody's entitled to a defense. I too would like to have a defense attorney in the event that I need one.
The problem
But
is,
I think that the 4 are for experts. I'm sorry, Joe. I apologize. I digress. But again, I had stipulated to that number, and it just
you're not in trouble. It's okay. You were relieved from your stipulation.
I didn't think I was in
Vice Chair
trouble,
had a
but-
question, and then Joe's been waiting forever.
Sorry, less of a question, more of a comment.
Oh.
This whole system strikes me as an evidence gathering tool. Like, this is the top of the funnel. So it seems a little weird to me to say that we should look at the top of the funnel and see if the top of the funnel is helping us prove the stuff at the bottom. Because you'll never get to try. You need to have the evidence come in before it's ever getting to the crime that would be analyzed, to ever figure out if you can connect it to an ongoing incident, to ever figure out if you can charge something, to ever figure out if you can actually prove it. It seems to me that we really want to keep the top of the funnel as wide open as possible, especially if the privacy impact is relatively minimal, as it seems like it is in this case. The analogy that comes to mind for me is you're looking at a DUI arrest, you're going to go and breathalyze somebody. You wouldn't look at the breathalyzer and say, is this breathalyzer reducing the number of people who are being arrested or charged for drunk driving, or is that reducing overall drunk driving? Not necessarily. It's the evidence collection tool that allows you to prosecute drunk driving, similar to how gunshot location detection is the evidence collection tool that allows you, if you have other evidence, to then build upon and prosecute or just investigate, whether that is by picking up casings or by showing up on a scene. I certainly see the value in wanting to put more money into the second and third stages of, after you have the evidence, let's analyze it. But we also got to keep that funnel as wide open as we can. And it kind of sucks to have to make these. Council's going to have to make some real hard decisions about how big the funnel is going to be over the next budget cycle. But given the lack of privacy implications, this seems like one we should probably recommend to keep open. I'll leave that there.
Joe, and then Joseph.
Thanks. I try to let you guys deliberate without too much input from me. Couple of thoughts. A few years ago, when you first looked at the report, Chair Hofer, you actually put a value on human life. You calculated the number of people that were found shot that no one had reported. You did the math and you divided it out. And I don't recall the price tag, but it was several $1,000s. And you felt that a human life was worth at least that. And so,
For the record, I feel a human life is worth more than a few $1,000s.
that's my point, which is why you recommended that we keep the technology. So I look at the report and 56 guns recovered. I mean, what price do we put on the recovery of a gun that's been used or could in the future be used in a violent crime that was recovered because of a ShotSpotter activation? And so but again, I'm stuck on the 170 people, the 170 victims, and Captain Chavies is thankfully leading the rebuild of our ceasefire program, And, if you've read the ceasefire audit and you've looked at the study, you know that the city hit, almost a record low of homicides in 2016 or 2017, and we took the foot off the gas. And like the audit is very clear that we shifted priorities departmentally and citywide in such a manner that, coupled with the pandemic, we created a situation where now we're back where we were, many years ago. The number of homicides in a city is something we all watch, and we all watch. Are we going to break 100? In January, I'm always, when's the first one going to happen? And we're always compared to where we were the year before in the 3-year average. I can't help but wonder how many of those 170 victims would have ended up contributing to our homicide rate, which is a bellwether for how safe our city is for many people who study that. So I just feel like, as your, longest standing staffer, I just feel like there's not been a lot of conversation about, like, maybe we don't call it a crime reduction tool, but it is a victim. It's a victim sensor. We the fire department put sensors in the hills to detect wildfire. It's certainly not a privacy implication, and if it stops a fire, great. But if it gets them to respond more quickly to a fire that would have wiped out 1,000 homes, really great. So I just feel that number of victims, and maybe we should rethink why we use ShotSpotter. It is an evidence collection funnel, and it is a victim sensor. That's all.
Commissioner Levitt?
I was going to say something different, but can I just confirm with the 170 you're talking about, table 2 on page 6, assault with a firearm? Is that the number you're getting from?
No, I'm talking right towards the top of the report. Hold on, page 2, I think. ShotSpotter led police to 199 shooting cases, 29 of which were homicide, and 170 were assault with a firearm. OPD was able to provide and coordinate immediate emergency medical services. They even go on to suggest that OPD and medical response occurred within less than 2 minutes of the ShotSpotter activation. The ShotSpotter alert was within 10 minutes and 1,000 feet of the location where the victim was found. Staff believe there were many more cases. And maybe the department hasn't done as thorough a job delving into what would have happened with those 170. Maybe we need medical reports. But I just feel there's a lot there. That's a lot of people, and that's a lot of families where somebody didn't die. Yeah.
Commissioner Levitt?
Yeah, thank you for that. So I think what I was going to try and say, Vice Chair Gage, is the idea of this providing all of these benefits, I think, is a really worthy and important one, but I don't know that we have the data that shows that it has. And I think that you just talked about one. I mean, I don't know that we can take from it exactly what you did. I don't know that 170 lives were saved. There were people assaulted with a firearm, and I think we don't have the data. But I guess that's my point. We don't have the data to say this is an effective use of the money. We're assuming that is possible because of the things we've heard, but we don't have, to me, in this report, and kind of countered with some of the points in the motion, we don't have the kind of background to make those assumptions. And I think that that's what we would need to be able to say, yes, this, the benefits outweigh the costs. I think that, to me, it seems like it's very hypothetical that they could. I'm not sure if...
Go ahead. I think you make a really good point. Some of the data that is here is, Mr. DeVries did mention there's some specifics, but a lot of it's very general with respect to what happens when you come across a victim of a shooting. And then along similar lines, we don't have specifics here about how many casings OPD picked up that then tied into an active investigation
Right.
that then allowed them to pursue a new lead or pick up a suspect or connect a series of shootings. Like, we don't have that data. I'd imagine it's out there, but we don't have it, and it makes it difficult to assess efficacy for either of the current proposed for like efficacy tracks, whether it's as a a death mitigation tool, for lack of a better word, or as a evidence collection tool. And if that data is there, it'd be great to have, because then we have a better sense of if those are the purposes, maybe it's working, but it's not here. And we're kind of relying on anecdotes and personal experiences and maybe some professional expertise to kind of fill in the gaps. But until we have more hard data, yeah, you're right. We're kind of shooting in the dark here a bit.
And I think there is data that the chair provided about people who have done really careful statistical analyses saying the benefits don't actually outweigh the costs. So there is that kind of data. And on the other side, it just makes me nervous that we're saying, because it could do these good things, we should keep it. And that doesn't seem powerful enough to me. I mean, I think that we all agree, if it did the things that we would like it to do, it seems worth keeping, but I don't think we have a reason to believe that it does.
Let me
Can I
just,
ask a procedural question?
yeah.
So you, Chair, and I think this is an amazing conversation. You presented this document tonight, and it has some footnotes leading to some research. Have those footnotes, have those reports been shared with the PAC? Like, I wonder if people could read that and come back more informed to have a more informed discussion, because I think we do need to look at best practices nationally. We do need to look at what's happening in other cities. We do need to look at what's an apple versus an orange. And I think it's a really healthy conversation. I don't know if you're in a rush to adopt something tonight, but I think this would be really, and I also think what Commissioner Brown just uncovered, that 8,300 activations is not 8,300 responses by police, because at any given it would be great to know how many, I don't even know what you call that, responses, how many, if it's 1,000, then the efficacy problem is a lot different in terms of the impact on our response times to other crimes. So it'd be great to have more of that data before you make a decision, and including these reports.
So I'm going to speed read some of the stuff that I didn't want to overwhelm you guys with in that. And, I would ask rhetorically, we all have the same duties. I might have a couple administrative extra duties as chair, but we all have the same duties to vet these things. And it has been, kind of an ongoing problem. And it's a problem for a volunteer commission that, we just get an annual report, which is self-reported. And if you don't look below the headlines, it calls into question, what are we doing? Are we actually doing our job? And holding up the high standards that this body's been really known for. And, all this stuff has been public and pretty viral, and which is my answer to your question. All these white papers have not been distributed to the PAC, no. And, I've got them all in a Google Drive folder. I can certainly give access to everybody. But, MacArthur Justice Center at Northwestern study in Chicago, just 10% of the alerts over the audit period involved guns. Shots fired, calls for services in the treatment areas were 15% more likely to be unfounded. For fatal shootings, the gunshot detection technology was not associated with an increased likelihood of ballistic evidence collection or case clearance. For non-fatal shootings, same finding, not associated with increased likelihood of ballistic evidence collection or case clearance. Conclusion, GDT may not add value to investigations and may increase patrol workload. In Chicago, in one of the treatment areas, there was actually 15.6 more fatal shootings in the treatment area, 77.5% more non-fatal shootings, 115 more gun assaults and robberies in the treatment areas. ShotSpotter response time, police officers were dispatched 1 minute slower and arrived on scene nearly 2 minutes later. And, so we can drill into these things. You can also make the argument Chicago's not Oakland. What you said about the funnel is 100% correct, but I think it's missing the point that the funnel with this particular technology goes nowhere. I agree, you wouldn't even know really, what little piece of evidence is going to break the case or lead to something. And I agree, we should not, just make a hasty decision and close that funnel unnecessarily. But I do think from other jurisdictions and just the low, efficacy numbers we're getting specific to Oakland and just our own eyes, we know gun violence hasn't been getting better, which is not a statistical analysis, by the way. It's just this funnel isn't leading to anything actionable. Maybe it makes the community feel a little safer that we're responding. We could have also just started responding to every call. That was just a policy decision to make it a priority one decision to respond. We just didn't. And I just, the metrics are just not in favor of this. If it's, and I'm just going to be kind of candid. I don't know, Commissioner Brown, you might be the swing vote. If we need to, table this and you guys want to read all this, I can certainly send an invite to the Google Drive folder. But I'm just not seeing, with this particular tool, I want to root for it. It just, if gathering casings doesn't lead to anything, is gathering casings a benefit? If gathering guns doesn't decrease gun violence or put people in jail, is just the mere gathering of guns that are never going to get traced to anybody a public benefit? I think that's maybe where our sort of divide is whether these things are themselves benefits if they don't go further into the funnel. And I maybe that's where our split is. Yeah.
If I could, I'd like to weigh on this as well, since everyone else has weighed in. And as the
Take a number.
and as the junior staff person or the newer staff person to the PAC, I recall last year, I believe it was Assistant Chief Jones spoke to the PAC regarding ShotSpotter, and he made some very compelling cases, I think, regarding people that were found shot in our community. I believe he made the case for, he mentioned a case in West Oakland where the officers picked up the person, put them in their patrol car, and took them to the hospital. That's one person. And I'm sure there were other examples of that. So I think is one person's life comparable to, 1.3 million? And if it's more, saving one life, I think, really makes the case for us having ShotSpotter. So because it does save lives. And I think that was the primary case that Assistant Chief Jones made. So I just wanted to share that as my memory from that conversation regarding ShotSpotter last year. Thank you.
Okay. You got your hand up?
Yeah.
Let's start wrapping this up. Go ahead.
It seems to me that if OPD were able to respond more quickly, that maybe most of the time somebody was found because of ShotSpotter, they would have been found because the call would have come in from a person. So what we're saying here is we're putting in this automatic machine because people don't want to call in. Maybe we should look at why they don't call in. And as a total red herring, unfortunately, the ShotSpotter company that's been renamed is on record falsifying data in several cases, causing people to be in jail for long periods of time. They are not a reputable company or haven't been. But that's a red herring.
Red herring. Okay. Well, tell you what, for giggles, go ahead.
One thing quickly. I don't know how likely this conversation will continue, but to that same thread that Lou was bringing up, like the 99% of the calls that were not called in by the community, one of the questions I had was with those activation or the alerts, were there indeed victims on site or like casings recovered, or how much of that percentage was a false activation, right? And because there's one thing if somebody doesn't feel like calling the police because they're concerned, and it's another thing, as almost everybody here has experienced. I've been on hold with 911 before in Oakland, and I know that's a very common experience. And so, I do think actually it's a really difficult thing based on the information we're getting in this annual report to know how much of the response time would be improved, or in terms of even like for responding to people's direct calls, because their officers are dispatched looking for cases because they're getting an overwhelm of alerts. And again, this is me hypothesizing, like I'm not saying that I know that that's the case, but if we were to come back to have a discussion, I would want to know like more granularly what some of these percentages mean.
So, I know the chair said earlier that can't say for certain anything, but I will say, I think I can say this for certain, that without ShotSpotter, our response times will not only be slowed, they would not even know where to go. So again, as a person who lives in Oakland who hears gunshots whenever my bathroom window is open or if I'm out in the backyard, not forever, like we don't live in a constant state of gunfire. I don't want that to be I don't want anybody to believe that because I love the city. However, I do hear gunshots from time to time. I have no idea where it's coming from. If I wanted to call the police and tell them, even when there's gunshots in my neighborhood, I can't say because I don't have sensors in my brain that can triangulate. I can't say exactly where it occurred. And I often know that giving wind or other factors, I've worked as a patrol officer and have been dispatched to a 415 gunshot that was literally 7 or 8 blocks to the north and the west of an actual shooting, because you hear gunshots and depending on where you are in your house and which window is open and where, like, you just don't know. And so I can say unequivocally that our response time will be it would be slower. I've sat in my police car working and heard gunshots. I need to go there and not know where to go. I have an idea. I heard gunshots to the west of me. That doesn't necessarily mean where it is. And we also know, sadly, I've seen it in my own life, but also you've seen it on videos where people are dying because of response times. And you talked about Chief Jones talking about, that happened last night. That was the first thing I lived with. That happened last night where we transported someone. And I'm not here to say that person would have died had we not taken them. I don't know. But it also, it helps. And so the idea, I'm sorry.
And I'll just say, look, the technology also gets location wrong at certain times. And if you add in our 73% failure rate to your response times will be slower, because those were 73% wasted routes. So we're wasting man hours, we're wasting labor. If notice led to action, we wouldn't be having this conversation. We're having this conversation because the notice itself, it's not leading, in my opinion, to something sufficient. But, just for giggles, I'm going to put this amended motion on. If it ends split and OPD wants to rewrite their report because they misunderstood some of the categories, then so be it. The PAC recommends that the City Council not renew or extend the contract with ShotSpotter, which expires June 30, 2024, and that the approximately $1.8 million in future savings be directed towards a more effective and proven alternative with less impact to civil liberties that will improve public safety. So, not being specific, just leaving it at that. And Lou, as a second, do you agree with that? Okay. Everybody understand the motion? Okay. Felicia, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, I will call the roll. Commissioner Suleiman? Commissioner Brown?
Going to abstain because I don't fully understand the data.
Thank you. Chair Hofer?
Yes.
Commissioner Katz? You turn your mic on, please.
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Tomlinson?
No.
Commissioner Everhart,
Yes.
Vice Chair Gage,
No.
Commissioner Levitt.
Yes.
Okay, so the motion carries. Okay. Next item